What's up, everybody? Carl here, and welcome to the first episode of 6 Strings, 4 Levels. The idea here is that we're going to break down each lesson into 4 color-coded difficulty levels. So we'll start with something like this, and work our way up to all of this. Lesson, we're going to talk about how to layer a bunch of different guitar parts, and we'll use common techniques that have been used in commercial music over the past 60 years or so. But first, let's play through everything back to back so that you can get an idea of how it all fits together, and then we'll go back and break down each part. There's going to be full tabs and backing tracks at the link below, but I would love to just start jamming, so grab your guitar, play along with whatever level you can for now, and let's get started. All right, well, that was fun. So we basically just jammed about 6 decades of commonly used guitar techniques into one exercise. But before we dive into all the parts, let's talk about influences for a second. I made a Spotify playlist. I'll put a link in the description, but let's actually take a look real quick. Some of these just demonstrate one of the techniques that we just played, but most of them are also really masterful examples of how to layer, arrange, and mix multiple parts. Okay, so after listening to all those tracks with a fine-toothed ear, I think you'll find that they are all very sonically considerate. What I mean by sonically considerate is that each part has its own little sonic space in the track. And the classic way to think about this is to imagine that your track is sort of a 3D box of sound happening right in front of you. So of course you can turn the volume up, you can turn the volume down, you can pan things to the left, pan things to the right, but we also have effects like reverb, delay, EQ, compression, which all allow us to make things sound either way more up front or farther back or up in the corners and everywhere else in between. So this is not a mixing lesson, but you can't really talk about layering a bunch of parts without dealing with some sort of mixing principles. Otherwise, everything's just going to sound terrible. If you're fairly new to mixing or you're just in need of a really good laugh, there's an amazing and hilarious video by David Gibson called The Art of Mixing. Here's a quick look at my Logic project where you can at least see where I'm panning things for now. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through each plugin right now, but I will make a short video that I'll put a link to down below. I am not a trained mixing engineer by any means, but as we go through the parts, I will try to share with you just some basic mixing tips that I've learned over the years. Okay, so along with being sonically considerate, we also really want to be rhythmically considerate. You might have noticed in some of the parts that we played in our track that there were a lot of rests happening. And that's because you just don't want to be playing everything all at the same time. Sometimes you do, and those parts generally become like the foundation of your track, but other times you definitely don't. And again, if we think about all of our parts happening within that 3D box, our rhythmic choices are really going to help us to create that space and separation that we need between all the parts. So first up, we have two palm muting techniques. The first is doubling the bass part up an octave, which is a very classic technique that just kind of adds some punch and emphasis to the bass line. The other one is another part that just follows the same rhythm, but adds like a harmony part to it. The trick to getting the palm mute to pop out correctly is to just use this part of your palm here and find the sweet spot that's not too far in front of the bridge or too far on top of the bridge. So you want it to be just in front of the bridge, right about there. The other thing is that you want to try to do these parts without a lot of accents. So you don't want like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. So that everything sits nicely in the track, you want to try to keep it nice and even. The other thing to consider is string sliding and string noise. So if you use your first finger, you hear that slide. And sometimes you do want the slide sound, but sometimes you don't want that. And so you would just have to lift up briefly so that you don't hear it like this. Okay, it's just something to think about because when you do start recording, all these little decisions get put under a microscope and they're very apparent. All right, so next up we have some lush, beautiful open chords. But the important thing to realize is that they all share the common tones of the top 3 strings. So with these types of voicings where you have common tones, you can change the quality of the chord without really having it be too distracting as you're changing. Okay. First up for level 2, we have an ostinato part, which is basically just a repetitive riff that, in our case, plays the same 3 notes over the entire chord progression. The cool thing about any ostinato part is that it outlines different colors of the chord tones as the chords change. We're outlining the G, D, and E, which is the 5th, the 9th, and 3rd, and then over the A minor, it's the same notes, but it becomes different parts of the A minor chords. And then over the E minor, we've got the minor 3rd, the minor 7th, and the root. One thing to note about the right hand in this particular pattern is that it's down, up, down, up, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. So there's that double up happening after you play the open E string. You can play it many different ways. You could also play it with your fingers. But I chose to play it with a pick because I wanted it to sound a little bit thinner in the mix, which actually kind of leads us to talking about the mix and a little bit about this guitar too, which I wanted to mention that this guitar is a Fender Jaguar, Johnny Marr Fender Jaguar, and it has this cool switch, which I think most, original Jaguars did as well, but it's basically a high pass filter. So when I flip it up, it cuts out the low end of the sound. So here it is normal. And then when I engage it, it sounds like this. So it's not a huge difference, but it's a nice little thing to have at your fingertips if something's maybe just not quite sitting right in the mix. And so for this part, I chose to keep it up, and I also used the middle position, which is engaging both pickups. So next up, we have something that I am affectionately calling Blackbird Voicings because, well, blackbirds singing in the dead of night. Now, I'm not sure if Paul McCartney actually invented that technique, but there's a lot of different varieties. For example, okay. But that slightly different version of it doesn't utilize the open G string like we do in our part. The important thing here is that one part of the chord is going to be on the A string, and then the other part of the chord is going to be on the B string. And you're either going to have a 2-spacer like this, or a 1-spacer. Now I'm doing this finger style, and I'm using my thumb for the A string note, and then I'm using my second finger for the B string, and then I'm using my first finger for the open G. Okay, so if you're still with me, welcome to level 3. We're gonna talk about bubble picking first. Bubble picking is a very percussive, very muted sort of technique. And for our track, the inspiration for me came from Mr. David Williams, who played on Michael Jackson's
Don't Stop Till You Get Enough.
So the technique is basically a combination of palm muting with your right hand and then lifting up with your left hand just a little bit so that it actually creates a fully muted sound. So you go from to this, maybe even just starting with slow 16th notes and then releasing. And then you can start mixing and matching. So our example goes 2, 3, 4, 1. There is actually a harmony part to this that's in the full tabs, and that part goes like this up here on the 12th fret. 4, 1. And next we have octaves, which are used in a lot of different styles. You know, you could even go back to like Django Reinhardt or, you know, like Wes Montgomery. In this case, we're going to use a pick, and we're going to base it again off of a David Williams riff, the one that he played on Billie Jean. This part doesn't come in until like well after a minute into the track. It's in the first chorus, and then, of course, the part comes in like this. Saved it just for the right moment, and it's very impactful. So our part is somewhat similar to that, except we're gonna add a slide. So our part sounds like this. 1, 2. Couple things to note about the left hand. I am lifting up so that it creates that fully muted sound. I'm hitting the first note, and then when I do the up and the down after that, I'm lifting for those notes. So, and then I'm pressing down again for the last 16th note. So, like that. After that, you're going to do a slide. So, I'm keeping the note ringing for both of those. So you notice there's nothing happening here when I do the slide. The last thing to note about the actual playing of the part is to keep it rhythmically considerate. I placed it in the space between the bubble picking part. So 1, do do da da do do, do do da da do do. So it fits right in there, and we're creating a little bit more space that way. Finally, we have arrived at level 4, and we're going to start with something I'm calling the Cory Wong Special. Now, I could have easily called it the David Williams Special, or the Nile Rodgers Special, or the Prince Special, you know, stuff like this. Now, almost all of those players are known for using a Strat, or at least single coil pickups. So I'm going to stick with the Strat, and I'm going to use the 4th position. So you start here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's going to be a combination of these 2 pickups here, which is the characteristic Strat sound when you want something to be funky and kind of quacky. So the part is a little bit tricky. There's some things to watch out for. We've got some palm muting, we've got some double hammer-ons, and some slides. And there's also a slide here after the first note, the first two notes. So there's a slide there. And it comes in on beat 2. So I'll give you a bar up front. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a... Oh, and one last thing I forgot to mention, I was using a chorus effect from my pedal board, but since our next part and our very final part of the track uses a lot of different effects, why don't we just cut to the slipper cam and I'll show you what's going on. And here we are with the slipper cam. As you can see, I had the chorus engaged on the Line 6 HX effects, which I do love dearly. But for our final track, we're gonna do the magic delay trick. So let me just, since we have the slipper cam up, why don't I just show you? So we have the simple delay on. The time needs to be set to a dotted 8th note. The feedback I have set to about 18%, and the mix I have set to about 45%. Now for this part, I did go back to the Jaguar, and this technique is called the magic delay trick because you can go from this to this. Now the important thing though is that you want to set your delay to match up with the tempo of the track. To finish it off, I added a little bit of drive. And the very last cherry on top was the whammy pedal, taking it up an octave to make it sound almost more like a synth kind of thing, which sounds like this. All right, folks, well, we did it. That was a breakdown of all the different parts, and I tried to give you a little bit of insight into how and why I played them, and a little bit of insight into the mixing process as well. So now, it's up to you. You can download all the backing tracks, all the tabs below if you want to go in and recreate everything that we did here. Or you can totally get creative, come up with your own parts, mix it totally differently, whatever you want. But if you do take a shot at this, please tag me and hashtag 6 strings 4 levels so that myself and everybody else can see what you did. So if you enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe to the channel. It really does help. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.